Perfect. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our first installment of our Career Insight series for the fall semester, Careers in Climate Activism. I'm very, very excited for this panel. I'm really excited that it's our very first panel of the fall semester as well. My name is Jihyun Ju. I'm one of the advisors and a program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. And we'll be hearing from 5 Barnard alums today. Thank you so much to our panelists for making time to join us today. I'm going to drop the bios in the chat in just a second. There will be an audience Q&A toward the end of our program for our students in the room. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or unmute yourselves when the time comes. And just to get started, we'll start with introductions. If we can go around with our panelists, what is your current role and what sparked your initial interest in the work that you're doing now? And you know, this is informal. Anyone can jump in to start the conversation.
I'm happy to go first if you like. My name is Jordana Rubin. I'm Vice President of Disaster Resilience and Equity at AECOM, which is a large infrastructure program management company. I've been with AECOM a couple of years, but in the private industry for, I guess I would say, almost 20 years, and I was in the public sector before that. My role at AECOM is really in charge of growth and strategy for our disaster resilience service area. And so in disaster resilience, we look at the 4 pillars of planning, response, recovery, and resilience when it comes to disasters and human-made impacts. So that's kind of a little bit about my role. I've had a kind of an interesting path to get here. I studied environmental science and ancient studies at Barnard. So you might say, what does that have to do with anything? But I studied about ancient sewer systems, worked my way into the world of sustainability and then resilience, which overlaps quite a bit on disasters. So that was kind of a little bit about my path, how I ended up where I am today. I'll pass it on to somebody else.
I can go. It's great to be here. My name's Sarah Newman. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I was a U.S. history major at Barnard, and I didn't have a minor. And I started in the spring of 2021, the Climate Mental Health Network, which is working on the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. And I started the organization born out of my own struggles with a range of climate emotions. And I did not have a very linear career path, but I had worked for an interfaith climate campaign as one of my first jobs after graduating. And it really resonated with me to be able to talk with people and engage with people about the climate crisis in a very personal way. And I wanted to continue to do that work and study public health. And then, long story short, ended up working in the media impact space for many years. So it was like a big diversion. I worked on many films about the climate crisis. Started the organization a little over about 2.5 years ago. So I'll pass it to someone else.
I'll go ahead and jump in since we're on a history major theme. I was also a history major when I was at Barnard. My name is Rebecca Harbage. I'm currently the public policy director at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. And DEQ, as we are called, we're the primarily regulatory and permitting agency for environmental work in the state of Montana. So state government work. We deal with air quality permits, water quality permits, mining permits. We have folks working on Superfund sites, and we also have the State Energy Office housed within our department. I Also did not have a very linear career path that brought me to this position. I actually did AmeriCorps for a year after I graduated from Barnard. That's what brought me out to Montana. Was very fortunate. I love it here. Have now been here since 2008. So clearly love Montana. I worked at a grant program at the Department of Commerce here in Montana that focused on giving grants out to public schools for energy efficiency projects. And so that really was where I got to stick my toe into energy efficiency, energy policy, environmental work in Montana. Ended up deciding to go back to school, went to grad school for urban planning and focused on environmental planning, and then landed here at DEQ. I was an air quality planner for 6 years before taking my current position in public policy. Never thought that I would switch over into a communications field, but here I am, and I can talk more about that as we go on.
I can go next. I'm Heidi Ye, the Policy Director for the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. And when I came to Barnard, I was interested in environmental policy, but my advisor said, focus on the science first, and then you can learn policy on the job later. But I think I took the science thing a little too far. I did both a master's and a PhD in oceanography. But maybe at the midway point, I was like, I really need to get back to the policy stuff. I can see that there's such a big gap between the people that are doing the science and people actually understanding it. So I convinced the Pinelands to hire an oceanographer. And I've been here for a year and I've really been enjoying this challenge. So I see it as I'm just conquering one ecosystem of New Jersey at a time. And fun fact, I'm actually not from New Jersey. I'm from a tiny town called Barnard, Vermont, which actually has no relation. It's lovely to visit, although I don't recommend living there. It's so remote. Okay, I'll pass it on.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ximena Fonseca Morales. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the program manager for 2 community grant programs housed at the City of Seattle's Office of Sustainability and Environment. So I've been in Seattle for a little bit over 5 years now, I think. I think what actually really sparked my interest in the current role was my immigrant experience. I was born in Peru and immigrated to the Pacific Northwest 20 years ago this year. And so what was really interesting to me was kind of growing up seeing a lot of what appeared to be better environmental conditions in my new neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, and comparing it to my upbringing in Lima, which is a huge capital city in Peru, plagued with a lot of environmental issues that really impact people's health. And so I think it was around like high school where I had a chance to like really understand what environmental justice meant or tried to define it for myself. It was also around that time that I really like went on a whole learning experience around like climate change and like this huge thing that was impacting everybody, and was really intrigued by the idea of how people and environment really are impacting one another, right? And so really wanted to study environmental science at Barnard, and that's what I ended up doing. Was also super interested in the policy side, but decided to just pursue science, always focused on people and environment, which ultimately led me to actually also pursue a master's at what is now the Columbia Climate School, but at the time it was housed at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the master's in climate and society. I was really, really interested in wanting to understand sort of like the science behind climate change and how do you actually talk about it with community, with decision makers. Really at that time I was recognizing that there is a lot of power in being within the public sector and wanting to connect with folks who are making decisions, but also doing it in authentic ways, engaging folks who have been most impacted by both environmental issues and climate change. And so that kind of led me on this journey to then land at the City of Seattle. And I've been in my office for 4.5 years now. I started off as a program coordinator supporting our initiative, which is called the Equity and Environment Initiative, which was the first of its kind in the nation, I believe. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I've been in this role of managing 2 community grant programs for a little bit over a year and a half now. And so it was a brand new role at the time. And so I've been really excited to just step into it and work in partnership with community to kind of really drive the strategy for the work we're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. It's really exciting to hear or to see such a diverse range of majors. At Beyond Barnard, we always tell our students the major doesn't always equate the career path. And so I love seeing that in action here across this panel. Curious to hear, can you tell us about what your day-to-day work looks like? I know a couple of you touched on that in your introduction as well, but we'd love a deep dive too, and anyone can jump in.
I'm glad to jump in, and I will say there are many days where I'm like, wow, I'm just in meetings. I'm in meetings with my colleagues to talk about what we want to collaborate on across our program areas. I'm in this new role of, I'm technically called a strategic advisor, and you might wonder what that means. And so that means I'm really focused on like building the strategy, like the vision for the programs that I manage. But I currently also really focus on the implementation. And so for these two grant programs in particular, it means that I might be in meetings with our community partners who received a grant and talking to them about how their work is going, what resources they might need access to, and sort of playing a bridge roles to connect them to those resources, either at the city or with other community-based organizations or groups. I might be connecting with our consultants who are really critical of folks who move a lot of the projects forward. I ultimately oversee the work that we do, and it requires a lot of just open coordination along the way and communication. My work, I think, at one point was a little bit more like in community, and I really enjoyed being able to go out to community events and really see what our community partners are up to, what their priorities are. And I would say that there's also a lot that happens behind the scenes. And I think right now I'm in that more behind the scenes space where it's all more like program management focused, and truly it's like meetings galore. So whenever I have a quiet day where I'm just at my desk, it's great and I can do a lot of different things, but maybe not as exciting as what you hope to hear. And hopefully other folks have more exciting days at work.
So I'll go next if that's okay. So I'll split my days into what I call blue skies or gray skies. Blue skies is really when there's no immediate emergency going on. Gray skies is when there's a disaster or an emergency that's happening. So my days are typically split between what's going on and what we're dealing with. When it's blue skies, you know, usually I'm in my office. We're coordinating on implementing or designing disaster recovery or resilience programs. Yes, we always have meetings. Everybody loves to have conference calls and discuss, but that's about collaboration and working with teams typically to design a program that's going to help and ultimately help the recovery process for communities. Now, when it's gray skies, you'll typically find me on a plane traveling somewhere. For example, after Typhoon Marwar in Guam, I was out there about a week after the typhoon hit, meeting with different community members to understand what are the impacts. After the fires on Maui, I was out with our Honolulu team, meeting with community members. We have a cultural resources team that helps conduct outreach to the community in a culturally sensitive way. That's a very unique recovery and response situation that's going on. After Hurricane Ian or Idalia, the tropical storms that hit the East Coast, you know, we're meeting with community members again. What are the ultimate needs? How is their recovery process going to be different than any other community? And, you know, given what my title is, resilience and equity, it's understanding how we're going to design a program for that community in an equitable way that makes sense for that community, because every community is different and the fabric of what makes up that community is different. So each time you can't just bring in a FEMA team, you can't just bring in a team to just help with recovery, because it means something different for every community. So kind of depends on the day, I would say, that what my day looks like, but that's kind of summarizes how it changes and can fluctuate day to day.
I'm happy to jump in next. I had a similar split in mind. I wanted to share kind of what my best days look like. And I would say the best days for me are the days that I get to stay in my office or sit down with my team and really work through strategy behind a program that we're trying to implement. So my job is less actual directly working with communities, directly working with the public, and it is more helping the programs across the agency strategize about how they can do that. So we're really in my office in a support role. And so I'll just give an example of one project we've been working on over the last several years, and that is around wildfire smoke communications. So if you're not aware, which I know a lot of you are now aware, that wildfire smoke is a big deal and it's horrible when it hits you. Montana deals with it every summer in similar levels to what you all on the East Coast had this year. So we've been doing a lot of work at DEQ to try to ensure that we're on the same page and collaborating with our sister agencies who work on public health, who work on disaster and emergency, and then also the folks who do prescribed burning and work in like the state forests across the state. So one of the things that we really want to make sure to do is not cross into somebody else's swim lane is how we look at it. So at DEQ, our responsibility is really measuring air quality. So we have monitors set up all across the state, and we are the ones that have that data on what the air quality is today, right now. So how can we best get that message out to our partners so they can share, what are the public health impacts based on what the data says our air quality is currently. Another example that might be pertinent to this conversation is around the climate pollution reduction grants that the Environmental Protection Agency has released this year. So that landed in my shop. It requires a lot of coordination, again, with our sister agencies across state government to try to figure out, which agency is in the lead in preparing a climate action plan for the state of Montana. DEQ was appointed to the lead role by the governor's office. And so we have a team of folks working in air and energy, and then also out of public policy. And we sit down on a good day and talk through what is our public process going to look like? How are we going to reach out to communities across the state and hear what their priorities are? What are the priorities of the governor's office that we need to factor into our planning? Those are the good days. The less fun days are actually the more exciting days, probably. It can be very hectic working in the public policy office, working on communications in general. I think the environment, for whatever reason, in Montana always ends up being a political hot topic. So there are a lot of fires, hypothetically fires that we have to put out every day. So it's a lot of proactively communicating, reaching out, not just to our partner agencies across the state, but also to folks internal to DEQ, making sure everybody is in the loop, in the know, on the same page before we put out some messaging. And we really don't want to surprise anybody. So we're really doing a lot of communication, I would say, day to day.
My job is also a lot of communication, taking in all the science and policy, attending a lot of webinars, but then also staying up to date on what the government is doing, and attending a lot of in-person meetings. So like the Pinelands Commission, that's the bread and butter of my role. I go to their meetings 2 to 3 times a month. And then I have to formulate what are our policy positions and, formulate public comments on the spot. So that's one audience that I'm packaging information for. And then there's also educating our members about whatever is going on, sending out action alerts, telling people to contact their legislators, and providing them with policy analysis. And then my gray sky days, those are what I call going into Lorax mode. Maybe 2 to 3 times a month, I'll get a call from a concerned resident saying they're about to tear down the forest behind my house. Can you help me? So then I got to kind of drop whatever my plans were for the day, do all the research that I can, and point them to the levers of government that they can try to pull to slow something down, get more scrutiny on it. And then in some cases where it's really egregious, we then get involved as an organization doing grassroots organization. But a lot of the other time is grass tops organization. That's where you're meeting with the leaders of other organizations and talking about your strategy on things, especially because we're a nonprofit, we have a small staff. It's like you are the one person doing all the policy stuff. So it's kind of lonely, but then when you get together with the policy person from 10 other organizations, it's like that's the team that you have to work with, even though we all have our different primary topic that we're working on. We get to learn from each other.
I'll go. So I am running a startup organization. We're kind of emergent organization now. So I wear 1,000 hats. And we are a very tiny, nimble team. But I am working, the biggest thing that I work on is fundraising. And so I spend an extraordinary amount of time doing research, working on grants, and trying to secure meetings with potential funders, having meetings with funders, things like that. And then also, one of the best things that I love about this is that everything we're doing is new, and most of it has not been done before in the sense of, creating resources or research. And so it's, just having conversations with a lot of potential partners or existing partners and brainstorming what is needed on a research side, on a resources side for events, programming, things like that. Whether or not we have money for it, how do we go find money for it? So really just kind of like, there's this big issue of climate and mental health. We've kind of chosen our lane of what we're working on it, and how do we just keep expanding our capacity and reach to just reach as many people as possible. So that's just like a very exciting part of it. And then there's a lot of work also on existing projects. I don't do that as much, but I do work on some of the paid projects. So that's just, project management, having calls, writing documents, things like that. I also do things like sometimes I'm creating social media posts and overseeing interns who are managing our social media pages, organizing like webinar events, things like that. And then also engaging with, we have a Gen Z advisory board, so engaging with them a lot in their programming, their work, checking in with them, things like that. And then doing the same with other advisors like scientific advisors and academic advisors. And then just really trying to think about all the time how to be as innovative and nimble as possible to really try to think about working across sectors and, how to create more programs to get people mental health resources in response to the climate crisis.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'm seeing in all of your roles, I'm hearing the various ways in which each of your roles support and address issues affecting a diverse range of groups. As we're hearing more and more about climate change disproportionately affecting communities of color, can you speak on the ways in which the spaces that you work in or the communities that you work with are further addressing this issue? And anyone can jump in to start.
Maybe I'll start, kick off by saying the Department of Environmental Quality has recently launched an environmental justice work group of DEQ staff who are putting their heads together on coming up with some solutions and ideas and concepts on how to move forward. We are very much under an EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency lens when we look at environmental justice. So we're really looking into how do we adapt our communications and outreach as a state agency to make sure that we are minimizing disproportionate impacts from our actions and our approvals, and also ensuring equitable access in all communities to the resources and services that we provide. So I would say Montana is probably always a little bit behind a lot of the rest of the country, especially the bigger cities. But we do have 7 reservations within our state, and also 1 landless tribe within Montana. So as a piece of this, we're actually prioritizing outreach to our tribal nations around the state, to basically sit down and listen to what environmental concerns or interests the tribes have. So just recently, for example, we learned that on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, their power bills are $400 a month. That is criminal in my mind. It's like mind-boggling. So how can DEQ as a state agency with some extra leverage and access to resources, how can we provide kind of a link or a way for the tribe and the communities within the tribe to access those resources more easily? I mentioned the climate pollution reduction grant earlier as well. A big focus of that grant is this, how do we engage and outreach to and facilitate conversations within some of the disadvantaged communities around the state. In Montana, we see a lot of low-income communities across the state, very rural, isolated places. So we're trying to figure out the best way right now to engage with a broad audience and hear solutions and hear ideas from them. And then also, like I said, serve as that kind of link or access point to additional resources.
It's unfortunate to hear that Montana's a little behind, because you guys have a green amendment. We're jealous of that. We're trying to work on that here in New Jersey.
The constitutional amendments.
Yeah.
For
yeah,
those who
hopefully.
don't know, I'll just share just really briefly what that's referencing. In Montana, our state constitution is pretty unique. We have an inalienable right to a clean and healthful environment as part of our state constitution.
Mm-hmm. And there's a movement to get that in every other state. So in my role in the Pinelands, the government activity that we monitor and businesses and stuff, it's primarily about what is getting built, where, how, and for who. We're trying to balance environmental goals with the need for more development in New Jersey, trying to get it in the right places, but then making sure that that includes affordable housing. Like New Jersey has some of the most progressive laws on affordable housing, but it's up to groups like ours to make sure that every single development is actually living up to what it's supposed to be. Because we're seeing so many deals being cut where like they're required to have 20%, but the town said they're okay with 13% of their units being affordable. And at least in New Jersey, the research is that diverse communities, they are where the affordable housing is. So that's like the very small way in which we are trying to make sure that communities of color, that there are other options for places where they can live, that like if we're working on making the Pinelands a beautiful place, that it's a place where everyone can live. And then we also have to do work well outside of the Pinelands, going into the urban communities around the borders. We've been doing a lot of stormwater management projects to try to reduce how much flooding occurs in these places where there's so much impervious surface. To get those two of the main ways in which we're interacting with that space.
I can go next. So when it comes to the mental health impacts of the climate crisis, it's very much a issue of equity. Most of the healthcare system is not prepared to respond to the magnitude of this problem. Let's start with that. And one of the issues is that we are operating in this Western model of mental health care that focuses on one-on-one therapy model. That's not culturally accessible. That's financially not accessible to vast swaths of the population. And we could train every single psychiatrist, therapist, social worker in the United States. We will still not have enough people to respond to the magnitude of this problem. And so the solutions to this has to be in a more public health, community-based approach. And that doesn't mean that professional mental health providers should not be trained. They absolutely should. And they are woefully undertrained. It's virtually not offered in any professional programs. It's only slowly being offered at, like a couple medical schools, for example. There's a continuing education program for therapists, but it's tiny, tiny, tiny. And so the response really needs to be community-based. And, a lot of research shows also that people really turn to their peers and to community members for their emotional support when they're in time, having problems or crisis and so forth. And so it's really, and there's a huge need to be able to destigmatize this issue and get people tools and resources and create infrastructure within existing programs so that people have the opportunity to connect with others and have the tools that they need to develop those skills for emotional resilience in the face of the climate crisis. And, another big part of this is that, obviously frontline communities are disinvested, under-resourced, and not able to, physically respond as well as other communities are to the physical impacts of the climate crisis. But that also applies to the mental health impacts of the climate crisis because of that lack of healthcare and of different mental health support options. And so it's, a compounding situation. And another critical aspect of this is that when communities are experiencing trauma, as Jordana is doing in her work, if people are not getting mental health interventions, it's, you're adding additional layers as you continue to experience more impacts from the climate crisis, whether it's like, displacement because of wildfires or floods or whatever it might be. And then the last thing I'll say to all of this is that, people often say, who has climate anxiety, or why do people have climate anxiety or climate grief, things like that. And it's not a standalone issue. There are people who they are coming to this with climate anxiety, but many, many, many people are coming with pre-existing mental health conditions or feelings or emotions due to structural oppression that we are living with, whether it's violence or poverty or misogyny or racism. And all of those are impacting people's mental well-being. And then you add the additional layer of the climate crisis on top of it. So you're already struggling with mental health, challenges because of those pre-existing issues. And then you add on top of it, well, you can't go outside because of extreme heat, or your family is displaced because of a wildfire, or your family loses its home because of a flood, and you're living, in an impoverished, under-resourced community, and it just continues to compound the situation. So it's very, very much an issue of justice and equity that will take, really takes a cross-sector approach to recognize this, to destigmatize it, and to really integrate the necessary responses to this.
I think, on that note, Sarah, of like the intersectionality of racial justice and social justice and economic justice, I would say that that's where the work is really rooted at the city of Seattle. We have a climate justice agenda that really recognizes that Seattle is very much I think, thought of as a leader in terms of our sustainability and environmental work. And what's also true is that communities of color, or low-income communities, folks who are immigrants or refugees, don't necessarily benefit from that progress in the same way. Those are the folks that are most vulnerable and hit worse by the drought that we experience, the flooding, our air quality issues, extreme heat, everything that folks have already mentioned. And so this agenda is like almost like a three-pronged approach to create a structure for the work that Seattle is doing. It's focused on building an equitable, clean energy economy that's really rooted in the recognition that we need a lot of folks to be part and ready to join the clean energy economy. And we need to be making investments and creating opportunities for folks of color to be able to enter that industry. It's also, the second focus is ensuring a just transition away from fossil fuels. And the third is investing in healthy, resilient, and well-connected communities. And I would say that's where the work that I'm leading is really nested in. So I mentioned earlier, I manage 2 grant programs. I'll focus on one of them, which is called the Environmental Justice Fund. And that actually began in 2018 when community leaders at the time worked very closely with one of the council members at the time to essentially asked the city to set aside some funding to actually invest in work that was being led by our communities who are at the front lines. Because what was happening, and I think continues to happen on a wider scale, is that these organizations may not have the resources in terms of like staff capacity or access to the insights for how to navigate fundraising. And what that often results in is that they're not receiving funding and they're doing really critical work because they know what their communities need, but they're not, they don't have access to funding, right? And so this program began with $250,000, and since then it's grown. This year we will be granting $1 million, which is I think really speaks to the work of our community partners who have been advocating for this sort of program to exist, so that we can deepen not just the partnership, but really be able to invest in work that is the result of our communities' brilliance, what they know their communities need. And so this program has always been focused on Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, folks who may be immigrants or refugees, as well as low-income communities. And so all the projects that we fund are either led by them for their community members or led by organizations who work in true partnership with the communities that we want to be serving. So that's one way that we're able to really center our communities of color in our work. From the strategic maybe side of things, part of my work is to really create opportunities to bring along our partners, to build trust with them, and to engage in transparent conversations where we can hear from them what's working in terms of how they're able to access these funds, and what are barriers that we actually need to address so that they can access these funds, coupled with what does it look like for us as a city to actually invest in our community partners outside of just a competitive grant making cycle. And so for me, it's really exciting to be able to sort of wear these different hats, where I'm seeing the work of our partners and the difference that it makes when they have access to these funds, as well as creating opportunities so that they're at the table with us, really providing direction for how we continue to evolve this program that has been impactful just in its first 5 years. So I think at this point we've granted close to $3 million, I would say. And we're hoping to continue to do this moving forward.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. In these last 15 minutes, I want to open up the floor to our students in the room. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask our panelists any questions that come to mind. If you're feeling a little shy, you can also put it into the chat, and I'll read your question aloud as well.
Hi, I can ask a question. My name is Sonia. I'm a senior at Barnard College studying environment and sustainability. And I would say that I would be very interested in getting into more of the public sector, like a few of you guys working for, state or local government, but I don't necessarily understand the path to that. Like, I don't necessarily, want to go right into a graduate degree. So if I was, graduating this spring, how would I kind of enter into that world?
I could jump in and try to give you some recommendations. So I think I said earlier, I did AmeriCorps for a year after college. That's what I did right after I graduated from Barnard. That brought me out to Montana. It also helped me build connections in the community. So I did my service in Helena, Montana, which is the capital city. So that's really convenient because that's where our state government is located. I was able to connect with some folks through my AmeriCorps service who served in the legislature. In Montana, our legislature meets for 4 months every other year, so it is just a tiny little period of time. But I was able to get a job helping out in the Sergeant at Arms office during the legislature right after AmeriCorps, which then got me some additional connections, and was able to find out about some programs that were new following session, and they were looking for an admin assistant basically at the time. So I would say get your foot in the door wherever you can. Connections are always going to help. So if there's a role where you know you'll be working closely with a state agency or a local agency, that would help. Maybe you do that for a little bit, you get some connections and you learn what's available and which jobs are going to be posted that would be of interest to you. And then you can shift into that. In terms of focusing on transferable skills, research, writing, communication, I think all of that, wherever you work, will be absolutely necessary and critical, and set you above other applicants, especially if you're interested in policy work in the public sector.
I want to echo what Rebecca said about your network. And I can't stress this enough for everybody on this call. You're going to get your job somehow through your network and who you're connected to. It might not even be your first connections, let's say, on LinkedIn, if you're thinking about that, or people in your immediate circle, but it may be someone that they know. So don't underestimate the power of your network, and to grow that is so important. I worked as the environmental manager for the city of Miami Beach. That was before sustainability was even a word. So I'm dating myself, but I fell into that job, and I'm going to say fell into it. I applied for just like a coordinator position, and then the environmental manager left 3 days after I was hired, and I got pushed into that role. So city government, county government, it's an amazing place to start out, to learn. It's like learning by drinking through a fire hose. You're gonna learn things that you're not gonna even have considered or thought about during school. And it's just a fantastic way to start out. So, you'd be amazed by what kind of help city governments need. So they're always, typically looking to bring in resources. Be creative, like, Rebecca touched on different transferable skills. Think about, where do you want to go next? So, if you're going to take a job in city government, what are you trying to build, and where do you want to go next? So keep that in the back of your mind also, because you're creating a foundation right now that'll help forge your path forward into your, as you develop yourself and your professional goals.
Not specific to government jobs, but I'd like to echo that LinkedIn is awesome, not just to connect with people, but it's like everyone's basically just posting their resumes there. So find someone whose career you admire and just like work your way back, see how did they get there? Because I've actually been very surprised to see a lot of leaders in New Jersey government that like they come from a whole different lot of career paths. So it doesn't necessarily make things more clear, but it kind of gives you hope that, it's never too late to jump over and try that.
I think on that note, Heidi, I'll add that what I found to be really helpful when I was just coming out of grad school was actually reaching out to folks that maybe I met at events that I was going to, in terms of like, I was really focused at the time on building my network, and really to just understand what are the different types of job that exist within local government, and what do people's like career trajectories, what did they look like? And so what it meant was that I was connecting with folks via LinkedIn, following up after meetings, asking folks to just meet with me for 30 minutes over coffee to just share a little bit more about what their background had been like, how they got to where they were. And I was so surprised and really grateful that everybody was willing to take that time out of their day to meet with me. And these are all folks that I'm still in touch with. And so that's something that was really successful and that I would recommend doing too, in addition to what other folks have already said.
I just wanted to add, I put in the chat, I think outside of your job, if you end up with a job where you're like, I don't know if this is really what I want to be doing, exploring the options in terms of, can I get a position on a board for an organization that's doing the work I'm interested in? Maybe they're not hiring right now, but that's a great spot to start to meet people in the community who are doing that work, who can see what you're able to do, see that you're smart, intelligent, passionate, and motivated, and they will come to you if there are opportunities that come up. So I would suggest doing that if you end up in a spot where you're just like, this is fine for now, it pays the bills.
Hi, I have a question if we're done with the last one. My name is Isabella, I'm a junior. Thanks for speaking with us. I imagine that all of the work you guys do runs into a lot of issues from like a lack of resources or just support in general. As far as like your job with ACOM, I can imagine that like federal funding doesn't come through when like disasters strike. And then at Montana, I can imagine that there's like some sort of political gridlock at times just because of who is the governor and stuff. So how do you guys work through this? It seems like an insane issue to like even try and tackle. So yeah, loaded question, but
Great question. So I'll start with the idea. So in disaster recovery, there's a threshold, there's a dollar threshold, and it really relates to the amount of damage to a community, right? So if you hit that threshold, you get what's called a presidential disaster declaration. And that triggers FEMA money, it triggers HUD money. And if you don't trigger that, then you have to rely on the state funding. And so it's actually an important question because and there's a whole conversation now. I think I've had a conversation about this with the Montana emergency manager, specifically because there's continuous fires, but individually it doesn't meet the threshold, but collectively over time it should. So there's something called the Stafford Act. That's the policy that guides how FEMA funding or disasters are declared and how everything works. And so there's a whole equity discussion even around how that process for federal funding should even work and if it's broken or not. Should the states even be more self-reliant? Should they have their own funding? Should everybody be paying, for disasters around the country? Let's say you live in a state where they're not high hazards and you're not constantly impacted, like a state like Florida, for example, where it's like Hurricane Alley, right? They're constantly getting hit by hurricanes. So how, the whole question about, does this federal funding system really make sense? Whether or not, we think it's important, obviously, so for the federal funding to come in, and typically it's really focused on low-income communities. But the idea is, should states be self-reliant? Because there are going to be times where you're not going to meet that threshold and you still have to respond and recover. So, you'll see states will have their own funding sources locally to help with that recovery process. And that's usually that fills in that gap. But disaster philanthropy is a huge and important piece to fill that gap a lot of the times. There are a lot of different organizations that just are focused on filling that gap with philanthropic money to cover, the gaps in funding for recovery. So it's a great question, and that's kind of how we're kind of dealing with the impact of that situation.
Yeah, really, really good question. In Montana, you're absolutely right. The politics play into it at every level. Right now, we have a Republican administration in our Capitol building. So that means the governor is a Republican, and then the directors of each of our state agencies are appointed by that governor. Our legislature has also tended to run very extremely to the right. So it is a challenging environment in which to work on climate policy. So I would say you have to love a challenge, and you have to love the opportunity to make progress and keep your eye on the prize. So you have to realize that government is a big ship, right? To use that metaphor, government is an ocean liner. It's not going to turn quickly toward the end goal, but we can move the needle. And having good people in positions within government is what's going to move the needle. We are always underfunded at the state level. So there's always this back and forth between the state and EPA asking them, please give us more money, right? Right now, we're in a situation where because of some of the federal acts that have been passed, there's a ton of federal money out there. But as a state, we're looking at that money and saying, gosh, yeah, it would be wonderful to have a $500 million grant come to the state of Montana. We don't even have somebody who has the time to apply for that funding. And if we get it, who's going to do that work? So there's always this constant conversation about, do we have the capacity to do this work? And I think it's very exciting to be able to have the opportunity to work with the people who are making these policies and making these decisions for the future of a state. But like I said, you have to love the challenge of that.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question. If anyone wants to jump in for the final question. And of course, once again,
could I ask?
Yes, Nicole.
Okay, awesome. Hi, I'm Nicole. And I have to turn my camera on because I'm at work. But I do want to ask, as a senior who is struggling to decide like between like applying to jobs or like applying to grad school this year. And what my trouble is the jobs that I want, which are similar to yours in that like working for like government agencies that work with communities, that I find they want like a master's degree as like a credential. And so I was wondering if you think it'd be I guess like a smarter choice to get my master's first and then try to work for the government, or to find a government position without a master's degree. Yeah, and I'm interested in working for the New York City government, by the way. So thank you.
Well, I'll jump in just from my past history. So when I graduated Barnard, I applied actually to SEPA across the street and a few other public policy programs. I just decided for my own sake, my personal journey, I wanted to go straight to graduate school. And I actually remember having a conversation with the dean at SEPA, who told me, she's like, maybe you should go to work first and then come back and then come get your master's degree, because it gives you a sense of experience, a little bit of footing. And I told her, you know what, I really want to come to school. So we had this conversation back and forth. I ended up going straight through. I think it was a fabulous decision for myself. I think it really is all about your personal journey. If you start out in the public sector, get a job for 2-3 years, go back, and you have the ability to go back, like that's a big thing here. So there's no question that the master's increases your financial earnings capability. So if you think for some reason you're not going to get back there, I would factor that into your decision. For me, it worked out well. I got the master's and then I moved on in life. I met with a lot of folks now that I mentor with who are struggling just to get back after, like, let's say 10 or 12 years, where they should have gone back to their master's. They felt like they should have. And it's a little bit more of a challenge. So it's just making sure that as you're working through your professional journey and your path, factor that in. Do you think you're the person that's going to be able to get back to the master's and get it done? Or do you feel like you want to just get it now and move through life and keep going? So, but that's more of a personal decision. I hope that helped, but that's kind of what I ended up doing.
If it's something that you're on the fence about because of finances, certain programs such as what I did my master's in, oceanography, and a lot of other environmental sciences, you get paid basically like you're a PhD student, except you're just there for a shorter period of time. So you can at least think of some programs are not actually a financial burden. It's kind of just a job that you're doing for two or 3 years. So if that could at least lower the bar for how much of a sacrifice it is to do your master's, it's, you know, it's not the worst thing you could be doing with your time. But if you are going to pay a lot of money for your master's, you should be more sure that that's what you're wanting to do.
I can just share really quickly. I got my master's really late. I was like 32. And I was like the oldest one. Actually, there was someone who was like in his 60s doing like a master's. So, but yeah, I had not graduated from Barnard with the intention of getting a master's degree. And then obviously eventually did in public health. And I'm really grateful that I did get the master's in public health. It's been very useful in all of my career path. But I also felt like when I graduated from Barnard, if you said go get a master's degree, I would not know. I would not have been able to say, I know I want a master's in XYZ, and being able to work in a lot of different things helped me get a lot of clarity about what it is specifically that I wanted to get a master's degree in and why. And so I felt that when I got that degree, I was very clear on why I wanted to do it and why I wanted to study it. And I also felt that I had a bit of more life experience than some of my classmates, where some of the coursework was a little bit more rudimentary in like organize, like how to do like community engagement work. And I'd been working as like a community organizer and for this, faith-based climate campaign, things like that. So that was a little bit of kind of a downside to it. But yeah, so that's just my life experience.
I want to jump back in here. I do want to be respectful of our panelists' time. I realize we've gone a couple minutes over. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and providing such thoughtful insight. For our panelists, you'll be hearing from me. I'll put everyone in one email so that contact information can be exchanged. For our students, I hope to see you at our next Career Insights event. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.